Hey everybody, welcome to the reproductive system. This will be we're going to do the male system and then we'll stop, and that's going to go with the meiosis test. So it's going to be the male system and meiosis. All right, so the male system, we're going to kind of talk about both systems here for a second, but the gonads are the primary sex organs. So in males, you have your testes, and in the females, you have your ovaries. So we're going to kind of wait on the ovaries and the females for next time, but I just wanted you to know that both males and females have primary sex organs. So let's talk about the testes. The testes are going to produce sperm. Now, sperm, we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go, but that is, again, produced in the testes. And the major hormone that the male system is going to use is testosterone, which is going to cause a lot of changes from a young boy into a man. So sperm is the male gamete produced in the testes, and then testosterone is the male hormone. In the females, it is called an ova or an egg, and that is the female gamete, and that will be produced in the ovaries, and where they will use estrogen and also progesterone, LH, and FSH, but estrogen is the major female sex hormone. We'll talk more about that in the female system. So the sperm itself, the picture I'm going to want you to focus on is the top picture. So the sperm, we're going to see this again coming up later, is a three-part story. It's got a head, and that's where the nucleus is. So if there's a nucleus, you know that means there's DNA there. And then you have a mid-piece, and the mid-piece is kind of this mid-piece right here. That's spot number 2. And that's going to have a lot of mitochondria. Those mitochondria are going to be used for energy in order to move the third part, which is the tail. So the sperm has 3 portions, a head, a midpiece, and a tail, and each has a different job. The tail, once again, is going to be to help the sperm move. That kind of makes sense. And then the head is protected, and this is not technically part of the sperm, but it's part of the sperm, I guess. And it's called the acrosome, and that's kind of has some enzymes contained in it, and it's protective, and it will be used to get into the female egg during fertilization. So as far as the picture goes, just focus on this top picture here. You're not going to need this bottom picture for your test. Now, the egg itself has a lot of protection. So what's going to happen is the sperm, there's going to be a lot of them, and they're going to be way smaller than the egg. And what they're going to do is they're going to try to get through this outer layer. And that's where the enzymes in that acrosome are going to help. So they're going to try and they're going to work together, but only one will make it. And you'll have to label this diagram as well in your notes. So fertilization is exactly what it is. Sperm plus egg. Now we just finished up, that's a cue. We just finished up meiosis. So we know that the sperm has half of the genetic material of the soon-to-be new individual, and the egg has the other half of the genetic material. So when you have the sperm plus the egg, and this has, once again, the n number of chromosomes, which is the n number of chromosomes, the new zygote that's going to form is going to have the 2n number, known as the diploid number, and that will be the same amount of chromosomes that the whole new individual should have and will need. So fertilization, millions of sperm, and this is, again, is a kind of crazy thing. Millions of sperm are going to be released into the female. Only one is going to ultimately reach. So as all of these sperm are swimming and they're doing their best to get to the egg, with the help of some enzymes in the acrosome, they will eventually break through that outer layer. And once again, the sperm's DNA will unite with the egg's DNA. That will bring your total amount of DNA back to what you should have, in case it's a diploid number. So the sperm in a human will have 23 chromosomes. The egg will have 23 chromosomes. That first cell that forms, called the zygote, will have 46 chromosomes, and that will divide and ultimately be the chromosomes that you have. So that is the importance of fertilization, to bring back the correct number of chromosomes for the individual. Now, the male system itself, we're going to look at this picture and another picture a lot coming up through these slides. You have your testes, which again are here, and they're not really protected, but they're in a sac called the scrotum, but we'll get to that later. And then there's a duct system. And the duct system is going to take the sperm out of the testes. It's going to come and kind of store here in this epididymis, which is this comma shape, which we'll get to in a little bit. And then the sperm is going to travel up the vas deferens or the ductus deferens. So the two kind of tubes that the sperm is going to enter first is the epididymis and the ductus deferens. And then finally, it's going to take this pretty long path around. It's going to pass through a lot of accessory organs, glands, which we'll talk about. And then it's going to leave out of the urethra. So what makes the male system and the female system different is in the males, the urethra is going to be used as part of the urinary system and the reproductive system. So you're going to see both, but we're going to primarily focus on the reproductive end. But that's what the urethra will do for both. Here's a kind of cool highlighted version. There's the epididymis, which is the first spot. We want to find out what happens there. There's the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. That's going to swing around. And then finally, it's going to leave the urethra. And that does not take very long once the male is ready. So this picture you will have to fill in. So just kind of follow your story there. Your testes or your testicles are where you're going to start the sperm production. It's going to store in the epididymis, which we talked about. It's going to leave up the vas deferens. As it kind of moves through its path, it's going to pass through the prostate gland. And the prostate gland is here. And you can kind of see this has got a little V in the action here. So one of these tubes is coming out of your bladder, and one is the vas deferens coming around. It's going to pass through the seminal vesicle. We'll talk about that. And finally, it's going to exit the urethra down through the penis. So that is your male system. So knowing the order of that will come in handy when we do our review work. So there's a kind of a model there, but there's your testes. You have two of them, testes. There's the epididymis, which is where the sperm will be stored, and then these tubes here represent the vas deferens. There are some accessory organs along the way, and each of these is going to have a role. So the seminal vesicle, which we will talk about, that has a role. The prostate gland has a role, and the bulbourethral gland has a role. Those are all inside. Now, the external genitalia, what you can actually see, is going to be the penis and the scrotum. And again, each of these will be discussed in detail in the next few minutes. So the external genitalia, let's start with the scrotum. So on the external view, obviously you cannot see the testes. But if you could kind of layer in through, there is some muscle here. And that muscle is going to become important, especially when we talk about temperature regulation. And then when you get in the next layer there, you can see the testes and the vas deferens and all the blood supply. So the external genitalia is a kind of like a sac of skin known as the scrotum. Now the testis itself is actually pretty complicated. So you're going to have this, we'll call it a kind of a surrounding. So this kind of is like a protection. So this is not the scrotum. You're now inside of the scrotum. So the tunica albuginea is going to be this protector. Now inside of there, you can see there's a lot of coiled tubes. So there's a lot of surface area there. And those are called seminiferous tubules. And that's where the sperm is going to be produced. It's then going to be stored in this comma-shaped area here known as the epididymis. But one of the questions I will ask you on your test is there's this area right there. That's called the ret testis. That's where this gap, well not gap, but the space between the testes and the epididymis is. So a lot of people kind of forget that, but that's important. And then once it's in the epididymis, which is this comma-shaped here, and it's ready to go, it's going to leave right through that tube right there, which is your vas deferens. So there's a lot going on here. You can also see there's a nerve supply and a blood supply there because you have to obviously bring nutrients and get rid of wastes. And also you have to remember there are hormones produced here and they will be released into the blood vessels. So very, very, very important. So the tunica albuginea is what surrounds each testis, so don't forget that. Once again, the testes themselves are going to have 1 to 4 seminiferous tubules. And they're very, very, very tightly coiled, as you saw from the picture there. And they are literally sperm forming or sperm making factories. And you're going to see the rate of them later in the presentation, and you're not going to believe it. They're going to leave the testes through the ret testis and head to the epididymis. So these are the kind of things you want to make sure you pay attention to when you're looking at the notes and when you take your test. Again, here they are again. So your sperm is produced right there. It's going to head out the ret testis, right through that little arrow. It's going to be stored in the epididymis, and when it's ready to leave, it's going to go right out the vas deferens. Now, the epididymis itself is a comma shape, and it itself is also tightly coiled. Remember, you're looking to increase surface area. And it's superior and posterior, but you're not going to need that. Basically, that means it's on top and behind, but I'm not going to ask you that. And it has one major role, and that role is to store the sperm. And it's going to do it for around 20 days. After that, the body doesn't get rid of it. It will be reabsorbed. But if all is working and reproduction is happening, it will expel the sperm with contractions of muscles, and that will help them move along. They will not use their tail until after they are released. So as when they're inside of the male, it will be muscular contractions of the smooth muscle of the walls of the epididymis and the vas deferens. The vas deferens, again, has a job, and it's going to carry the sperm from the epididymis where it was being stored. Remember, it's stored there. And it's going to leave through the ejaculatory duct to eventually leave the body. It is going to move through peristalsis, and those are the muscular contractions I was telling you about. And that's what happens inside of the male. Then once it leaves, then it will use its tail to swim. But when it's in the male's body, the force of the smooth muscles is faster and better than the tail. They're using the tail when they get to their ultimate goal, which is the uterus / fallopian tubes to find the egg. But again, we'll talk about that when we get into fertilization in the female system. The vas deferens ends in this ejaculatory duct, which is going to join the urethra, and we'll see the picture coming up in a second again. Now, in the event that you have either had enough children or you don't ever want children, you can get what is known as vasectomy. Now, a vasectomy, all it simply does is you have your testes right there. You have your epididymis. Whoops, how come it's not working there? You have your epididymis right. Well, your epididymis is over there. And then your vas deferens is going to leave out of your testes. In the event that you don't want to have any children, but you still want to produce hormones, you cut the vas deferens. So by cutting that, the testis itself is not affected, so you can still produce a testosterone. You still produce sperm, it just cannot get out of your body. So basically, a vasectomy prevents the transportation of sperm out of the body. It's not that you don't make it, it just cannot get out. If you look, the doctor will make a small incision, right, in the kind of front of your scrotum, if you will, and doctor will cut and tie or fuse the so they don't connect anymore. Not fuse, cut the vas deferens. So you can see here the sperm is there, and the sperm is there. They simply cannot get out. So the testes still make them. The epididymis still stores them. You just can't get out. So that's how vasectomy works, in case you were wondering. So basically, no sperm can leave. None leaves. Remember, you still produce it. It just does not leave. The urethra itself, once again, is going to be used for reproductive purposes and for the urinary system. So it does go from the bladder to the tip of the penis. It is joined by the vas deferens. It will contain both things. Well, not at the same time, but it will go to the bathroom for you gentlemen, and it will also carry sperm. The sperm is going to enter through this ejaculatory duct, and I'll show you where that is in a picture. So once again, the sperm will travel up the vas deferens, still no pee-pee, come around, and then right here, that's where it's going to join the urethra. This is your urethra coming out of your bladder. So if you are not engaged in any sexual experiences, your urethra will simply take urine from your bladder and it will leave out through your penis. In the event that you are having sexual relations, this kind of gets shut down for a second, doesn't get cut, it gets shut down, and then the sperm can travel through almost that same tube. Now the seminal vesicles, now we're getting into the kind of accessory glands that are going to help make what is known as semen, and we'll talk about that. That's how we'll start the next presentation, but it is located at the base of the bladder. So if you go back here, it's right there. That's your seminal vesicle right at the bottom of the bladder, and it's going to produce a very thick and yellow colored secretion, and that's going to make up 60% of the semen. So remember, you got sperm is in there, and now you have kicked in about 60% of this thick yellow material. Once again, that's right here. So it's sperm only coming up along the vas deferens. You join the seminal vesicle. That's going to give you 60% of the material. Then you're going to enter through the prostate gland, and that's going to give you a kind of milky fluid that its job is to help activate the sperm, and it's going to enter the urethra through small ducts. So now that's right here. So you've gave some material right there. Then your prostate gland is going to give you more material. And then, oh, it's not on this picture, but the last little bit of material that joins the semen is from the bulbourethral gland, and this is a little pea-sized gland. It's tiny, and it's kind of inferior to the prostate, and it's going to produce kind of this thick, clear, almost mucus-like fluid. And that has, again, some important jobs. It's going to hopefully cleanse out any acidic urine, because remember, the reproductive shares with the urinary system, and it's going to serve as a lubricant during intercourse. So all of that, those work together to make semen and all of the fluids that lead up to it. And the last slide for this presentation is, once again, there is that bulbourethral gland. It's small, so it's kind of off the beaten path, if you will, of the trip the sperm takes, but everybody kicks in. There's your seminal vesicle, there's your prostate, and there's your bulbourethral gland. So we will start our next presentation off with what is actually made. So once again, hopefully that was helpful.